Okay. Good morning, colleagues. And right. Good morning and good afternoon to those of you who join us from different time zones. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this discussion that is co-organized by the World Trade Organization and the Enhanced Integrated Framework on gender and women's economic empowerment, where we will have insights from some of the recent and crucial work in this area. My name is Nina Thornberg, and I am the ambassador and permanent representative to the WTO of Sweden. And Sweden is one of the largest donors to the EIF and also a key supporter of gender equality. So before we begin, let's go over a few important housekeeping rules. Today's meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format with participants present both in person and online via Zoom. For those joining us remotely, kindly keep your microphone muted and unmute it only when speaking. If you wish to contribute or ask a question, please use the raise hand feature and we'll provide you with an opportunity to speak. Our event offers interpretation services in both English and French. You can select your preferred language channel, both in the meeting room and on Zoom, to listen to the interpretation. Now, gender issues command our attention every day. Yet the month of March in particular offers a unique moment to rally around women's empowerment. It's been a period for reflection, celebration, and gearing up for future actions to ensure gender equality. The month started off with International Women's Day on the 8th of March, an occasion that was marked by global solidarity and calls for action to achieve gender equality. This was followed by the 68th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, the CSW 68, at the United Nations in New York from the 11th to the 22nd of March. The CSW 68 was dedicated to accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, with a specific focus on addressing poverty and enhancing institutions and financing through a gender lens. This important gathering underscored the pressing need for substantial investment in gender equality as a cornerstone for global progress. During this significant month, we have also seen a creative collaboration between the WTO and the EIF in a joint exhibition in the WTO's atrium. This exhibition brought to light the journeys of female entrepreneurs from the least developed countries, all supported by the EIF. It also highlighted the contributions of the WTO Gender Research Hub, focusing on the crucial theme of #TradeForWomen. In parallel, the EIF has launched a social media campaign dedicated to women's economic empowerment, featuring vivid examples of the transformative support extended in this area. Now, with much to explore and limited time, let's examine today's program, which I think will be both enriching and insightful. First, we will focus on the valuable work of the WTO's Trade and Gender Office, where we will hear about recent trade and gender developments, research, and upcoming work. We'll then go into results and insights from the EIF's Empower Women, Power Trade initiative. We will both get some snapshots of the work in LDCs, as well as a presentation of this initiative's review. So, without further ado, let's dive into our first agenda item on the recent work by the WTO's Trade and Gender Office. I understand that there have been important member-led outcomes on trade and gender equality at the recent ministerial conference. Outcomes that marked a key milestone in advancing the work of the informal working group on trade and gender. We will also hear about recent research on trade policy and discover key items from the Trade and Gender Office's work program for 2024-25. Guiding us through this segment is Ms. Anush de Borgosian, Head of the Trade and Gender Unit at the WTO. Welcome. Mr. Borgosian, the ministerial conference MC13 has been successful for trade and gender. Can you tell us how and why?
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and I'm really happy to be here today with the EIF, my partner in crime when it comes to trade and gender equality. Just to go straight to your question, I would like to say that there are actually 3 member-led outcomes that came out of the 13th Ministerial Conference that was held last February. And these are really, I would say, key milestones in the work that we're doing on trade and gender here at the WTO. The first one is this compendium on measures focusing on financial inclusion for women entrepreneurs. And actually, this compendium compiles all the different measures adopted by WTO members to support women entrepreneurs' access to finance. This work has been done jointly with the MSME group here at the WTO, and as well with the collaboration of the ITC and, of course, WTO Secretariat. So it's a kind of a joint effort. And it's in terms of the informal working group on trade and gender, it's the first trade and gender policy tool that the group has been, let's say, releasing. So it's very important, let's say, a document. I think I would call it a policy tool indeed, because in fact, it will help governments that would like to sort of foster women's entrepreneurs' access to finance to understand what kind of measures other members have been putting into place. So kind of using that as models, let's say, maybe to adapt to their national situations. And then it's also very important for women entrepreneurs because it gives them access to information that they usually don't have. And this is one of the key issues that women don't have, actually, or women entrepreneurs don't have, is that access to information on trade and trade rules and custom proceedings. This is one of the key obstacles that they face when they want to access global markets. And so basically we're responding to that barriers, we're addressing that barrier. And this is a living document, so of course it will be updated on regular basis. So it's kind of also, it will be in that regard also very, very valuable. So this is the first one. The second outcome, I would say, is also quite significant. It's the co-chairs of the Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender statement on the trade and gender equality. And actually this statement is very important because it outlines the continuity of work of the WTO on trade and gender. Just for reference, the Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender was created in the WTO in September 2020, so it's been quite a few years now. And since then, there's been quite a lot of incremental work on these issues until this ministerial conference. And what this joint statement does in the first place is recognizing that there is this continuity of work, and this work has been, in a sense, institutionalized in the WTO. But actually, it goes further than just that aspect. It also outlines some key commitments that co-chairs have been taken to bring the work to the next level. So this is something that, of course, when I say commitments, often we in WTO we are in fear of this word because it's like, oh, binding commitments. And no, of course it's an informal. I mean, it's an informal working group, so it's not a non-binding document, obviously, but still there are some engagements that the co-chairs have taken to bring the work to the next level. So I think it's an important milestone as well. And the third outcome, which is, I would say, for me, the one of the most important outcomes of the ministerial, is as part of the ministerial declaration, the Abu Dhabi Ministerial Declaration, there is a dedicated paragraph, which is paragraph 16. So I invite all of you to go and read that paragraph. So it's a dedicated paragraph that actually, sorry, recognizes the link between trade, gender, and sustainable development. And also it recognizes the work of the WTO on trade and gender, and in particular outlining some key aspects such as capacity building, for example, And these specific highlights are actually linked to the four work pillars of the informal working group. So in a sense, kind of, I wouldn't say formalize it in a sense, but kind of, recognizing that there is a body in the WTO implicitly dealing with trade and gender. And actually, why I'm really highlighting this paragraph in particular, because this is a ministerial this is a ministerial declaration. So, and this is being adopted multilaterally by all the members of the organization at the ministerial level. So in a sense, and this is also what a few members reacted after the ministerial, saying that it gives us a ministerial mandate to work on the issue of trade and gender. So I think this is an important milestone as well. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and indeed some important achievements here. So how does the informal working group on trade and gender intend to take this work forward?
I think the work of the group is based on a work program that that members of the group have adopted in June 2023. So it goes from June 2023 to 2024. And so this will be part of the implementation of the work plan. Again, it's a rolling work plan, so it's kind of open. It's not it's a living document. It's a living work plan as well. So integrating the outcomes of MT13 in that work plan will be quite easy. And of course, the group is going to start looking at additional concrete tools or policy tools or concrete outcomes of the group. And one key issue, which has been a really important focus in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years on trade and gender, is sex disaggregated data collection. And this is something that members have been focusing on, and this is a topic they're going to take forward to be able to produce something a bit more concrete around this idea about, how do we collect gender disaggregated data? What sort of methods can we use? Can we create some sort of a framework or model that can be then adapted by members according to their national situations or regional situations? So this is something that has been put forward by the co-chairs at the last meeting of the informal working group, which was held on 6 March. And members are going to move forward on this idea, among other ideas. I think, I would say that members are really in the starting blocks right now to be able to move things forward.
I can sure understand that. It seems like exciting work lying ahead of the working group. So thank you, Mr. de Borgosian, for these insights. Now let's turn to the recent research work on trade policy. I know that in the last 8 years, you have focused your research work on gender-responsive trade policy. Can you explain some of the findings you published last year?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. So I have a presentation for that. Okay. Can we go to the next slide, please? Or maybe I can. Oh, yeah, great, wonderful. So actually, this is the work that I've been doing for the last, I would say, 8 years, is really focusing on gender responsive trade policy making. And this is the looking at, when I talk about trade policy, I mean national trade policies, gender provisions that are in free trade agreement and regional trade agreements, and as well as aid for trade programs. So this is kind of the overall definition of trade and gender policy. In terms of, I would like to introduce the whole thing by saying that actually trade and gender are two sides of the same coin. We often have a sort of a motto or a slogan here that in the WTO that, making trade work for women. And this is something that definitely we see that trade creates opportunities for women. just in terms of, for example, we see that firms that are involved in export activities employ more women than those that are concentrated on the domestic market. Just, you know, as one example of that. But actually, also women contribute to trade expansion, and because they have different roles in the economy. They are entrepreneurs, they are innovators, they are job creators, they are economic diversification agents. They contribute to food security when we see these, you know, cross-border traders that are trading agricultural goods. So basically they have this contribution to trade, and this has been recognized by trade policies. We've seen in different policies, in trade policies in different WTO members, that actually they are linking women's economic empowerment to the expansion of their trade and their expansion of and their export growth as well. So this is something which I think is quite interesting, because we've seen in the past that in trade policies, the general objective was to say, well, you know, women contribute to development, sustainable development, economic growth, but that link with trade was not so much made. And so we see now in more recent trade policies that the link that women, as I said, contribute to export growth is made quite clearly. Also, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so this is, you know, we say that trade creates opportunities for women. That's great. But actually, we see that overall women participation in the labor market is lower than men. And there is this kind of gender gap in employment that really exists, as highlighted by the ILO. We see that less than 47% of women globally hold a former job compared to 72% of men. So this is one aspect. Of course, this is oversimplifying the picture, because in some countries and in very specific sectors, women are overrepresented in terms of workers. We think about, for example, in the textile industry. But I would say, therefore, it's not all about, you know, having how, you know, it's not about how many women participate in the workforce, but it's mostly about the quality of those jobs, and if they are skilled, high level, and high paying. And in fact, women are largely confined to low paid, low level, and unskilled jobs when they are working in the export sectors, and therefore putting them in vulnerable economic situations. And so we've seen some evidence from the WTO World Bank joint report that was published in 2020, that in fact 80% of female workers hold medium and low skilled jobs in export sectors. So, and why is that? We're going to go into that in a second. I just would like to give you some examples in some key export sectors. In tourism, for example, we have 54% of workers that are women, and women earn, in fact, 15% less than men for equivalent work in that sector. Similarly, in the health sector, as we have seen, and it's been quite revealing in the COVID-19 pandemic, more than 70% of the formal health and social workers are female. 84% of nurses and midwives are women, and yet women working in this sector earn 11% less than men in similar jobs and working similar hours. So this is something that we've seen across the board in the export sector. I'm not going to highlight. I mean, there are other key figures looking at women leadership in the health sector. It's quite low as well. Same thing with the air transport industry. For example, only 10% of the world's commercial airlines pilots are female. And so women remain concentrated, as I said, in low-level jobs. So if we could go to the next slide, please. The reasons for that, there are so many reasons. I will highlight a few here. First of all, informality. So women are mostly focused in the informal sector. So this is also why there is these barriers of accessing higher level jobs. And there is this issue of access to education, access to training. For example, just 3% of female employees in low-income countries are skilled workers. This is also linked to unpaid care work. Women spend 2 to 10 times more on unpaid care work than men, for example. And we know that the informal and unpaid healthcare work contributes to 1.5 trillion US dollar annually to the global economy. This is something which has been quite not so much highlighted as part of the importance of women's contribution as well, and hindering them to have access to higher level jobs in the workplace. If we could go to the next slide, please. Here I would like to focus, and this is the core of the research that I published last year, looking at these reasons that I've explained. It's not just, it doesn't explain everything. And actually the main reason is this issue of gender social norms, or I would say negative gender social norms. Women, according to the World Bank this year, women enjoy less than 2/3 of the legal rights available to men. And so this has been quite detrimental for women to have access to specific high-level jobs. And actually, this link between the fact that gender social norms prevent women from having access to opportunities created by trade has been recognized in some trade policies by some countries. We have, for example, in Pakistan's trade policy explains that despite an increase of 32% of women's participation in labor force, the employers faced difficulties in retaining them because of family priorities, inflexible workplace policies, and structural gender workplace barriers. So this is something which has been, sort of recognized by some countries in there as part of their trade policies. Also, in some regional trade agreements, we can see that this has been recognized in the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, the COMESA, and the East African Community, the EAC. They committed to adopt appropriate legislative and other measures to eliminate regulations and customs that are discriminatory against women, and abolishing legislation and discourage customs that are discriminatory against women, and take measures that shall eliminate prejudices against women and promote gender equality. So really, it's embedded in those two regional trade agreements. Can you have the next slide, please? Thank you. And so here I would just give you a concrete example of how these social norms really prevent women from having access to the opportunities created by trade. If we go, remember I told you about access to finance, and if we go back to this issue, we see, for example, that laws that preventing women from accessing property or owning property, it can be owning land, it can be other assets, prevents them from having access to finance because they don't have any collaterals to present to the traditional banks. So often it leads them to go to the more informal financial sector to be financed, for example, for their activities, their economic activities, their entrepreneurial activities. And so this increases the cost of trade, because without the finance, you cannot really cover the cost of trade. And what is the cost of trade really? It's about, for example, if you're trading goods, you have to have follow a certain type of certification to be able to export your product. You have to have a certain type of labeling, packaging. You need to be also able to understand the rules of law. And as I said earlier, women don't have access to this information. So there is this kind of knowledge gap about trade rules and trade proceedings, which they have to fill by paying an agent so that they can advise them on what sort of tariffs they could use and the issues of rules of origin and so ever. So, I mean, we could go on about, outlining these trade costs. And so basically, if you don't have the finance, you can't pay for these costs, then it creates additional barriers for you to be able to access to the global markets. And therefore, basically, women, I would say, remain in the informal sector. So this kind of negative chain of effect of these norms. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so basically, as a consequence, women are holding most vulnerable jobs. It leads women to be more impacted by crisis. We've seen that in the COVID-19 pandemic, when women were the first ones to be let go, especially in the textile or the tourism industries, because they were in the most vulnerable positions in the industry. We see also, for example, the impact of natural disasters on women. And there is an interesting case of what happened in 2005 in the US with Hurricane Katrina. So in 2005, most of the jobs lost right after the hurricane were lost by women. And 2 years following Katrina, women participation to the labor force dropped by 6.6%. So we see that not only, because they are in this vulnerable situation, they are laid off in a more, let's say, easy way. And it's even more difficult for them to go back to the workplace when they've been impacted by such crisis. So can we go to the next slide, please? So going to the trade policy aspect, and I will be shorter now. We can see that actually trade policy addresses women's labor conditions in the export sector and the impact of these social norms. For example, we see a lot of trade policies that are focusing on improving the labor conditions. Examples of that we see, for example, in certain countries like the Philippines or Pakistan, where the Philippines has actually created this financial incentive for women to be included in the export sector. And then the export sector said, well, thank you very much, but we need specifically our workers to also be able to work at night, and the law prevents us to do that for women. So we can't we can't employ more women in our industry. So what Philippines did, they changed the laws in order for women to be able to work at night, and they went even further. They imposed different conditions, saying that, well, if these women are working at night, then you need to put to set up some safe transport for them to be going from their work to their home. You need to be able to also take care of the women that have young children or that are lactating mothers. So putting into place some specific, let's say, programs for them. And so they have all these kind of accompanying social oriented policies to support their trade policy. We see the same thing in Pakistan, where, for example, they are actually investing more in women in a very specific sector in the country. And they have actually embedded the social measures into the trade policy. So this is two interesting examples. Of course, we see in free trade agreements that includes provisions focusing on women's labor conditions. Actually, 15% of the RTAs notified to the WTO that include provisions on gender equality focus on women's labor conditions. Then addressing the gender education gap, these policies also focus on that, enhancing women's skills. We see that in some national trade policies that have established training programs targeting female workers in the export sectors, sometimes even targeting more disadvantaged women like widows, young women, or women in career breaks, for example. Also, some of these policies focus on women entrepreneurs and female farmers to support the development of their export capacity, so through training programs. So similarly in some RTAs, and actually it's kind of funny because 50% of RTAs notified to WTO that integrate the gender provision also integrate provisions focusing on education, training, capacity building, targeting women directly or indirectly. Then also the trade policy is focusing on tackling mobility issues. We know that women have difficulties to access transportation, and it reduces their participation to the workforce by 16%. And so basically what these policies do for some of them, they relocate at the regional level some industries so that women have a better access to these job opportunities. Also, in some e-commerce strategies, it's been recognized that e-commerce can create more equitable opportunities for employment by eradicating the hurdles of mobility faced by women. So this is something which has been recognized also in mostly in national policies, not so much in free trade agreements. Then reducing the wage discrimination, we can see that some national policies are actually focusing on fostering women's participation in male-dominated sectors. This is quite interesting. We see some example of that across the board in developed and developing countries. And why is this important? Because when women have access to these kind of sectors, they expand they earn 2 to 3 times more than in traditional sectors where they are overrepresented. Some countries have been also actively or proactively addressing pay discrimination in the export sector. We see the example of New Zealand. New Zealand had done some sort of research in the country, and without specifically targeting the pay discrimination aspect. And then they realized that women in export sector were actually paid less than men. So what they did is that they issued a new law so that there was equal pay for men and women in the export sector. And one last point about, 2 last points really, addressing gender-based violence in trade. Also, we see a very nascent trend in trade policies that are addressing these issues, mostly through aid for trade programs and focusing on gender-based violence that are affecting cross-border traders. But we also see in some RTAs that there are some focus, very few of them, but there are some focus. And actually it's interesting that a few RTAs actually integrate or make reference to the recently adopted Convention 190, which is the Convention on the Violence and Harassment Convention of the ILO, which was adopted in June 2019. If we could go to the next slide, please. So just to conclude, I've been speaking mostly about workers, but we can also see that a trade policy address the impact of these social norms on women entrepreneurs. My example of access to finance earlier, I mean, shows this perfectly. Also, in terms, as I was mentioning a few times, access to trainings on trade for women entrepreneurs. Most of the trade policies, actually, most of the national trade policies are really targeting women entrepreneurs and targeting their capacity to trade. And measures related to trade facilitation as well, or gender-friendly infrastructures through aid for trade programming. These are also fostering women access to the opportunities created by trade. If we could go to the last slide, please. So as you see, there is a wide range of trade policies that can support women that members have been using, governments have been using. A key aspect is data and evidence collection. It's not just the statistics, so I want to focus on the evidence. It's also understanding, where you stand in terms of where are the policies, how gender is integrated in the different trade policies. So I think that's also quite important to know where things are in terms of the more legal framework that is implemented in countries. A key issue is also the implementation processes, or I would say the monitoring and evaluation of these policies. We see rarely a process integrated in these policies to really understand the impact of these policies. So this is something which is often missing. And as part of the work on trade policy making, there is a new policy conceptual framework that I've been working on, and it's also been included in the last papers that I've published last year. And it's really looking at the blended approach to gender responsive trade policy making, kind of looking at the policy in a very horizontal way and how they can support each other in terms of implementation and impact. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for very important findings here. So how do you intend to move this work forward?
Well, thank you very much. Yes, this work will continue. As I said, there are two more let's say aspect, this aspect of the blended approach to trade policy making, for example, which is going to be coming up soon. Also, we currently we're contributing to a joint research with UNCTAD, with OWIT UK and the Inter-American Development Bank, where we're going to look at the impact of how impactful gender provisions in RTAs are really on women. So this is kind of the work that we've currently will be the focus this year. Thank you.
Okay, and finally, looking ahead to the rest of the year and beyond, you've mentioned future key research work and focus. Do you have any other plans this year and the next?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of the work that we do, we also provide training for government officials on trade and gender policy making. Sorry. And so we have been the program has been set up in 2019, and we have been sort of revamping it over the years. And now we have a dedicated week on trade and gender as part of the ITTC programs. We're going to have the first actually training week in April this year in Spanish, and we're going to have another one in June in English. So these are really very concrete type of trainings looking at supporting members to integrate gender into their trade policies. And so we're going to expand the offer that this year to go sort of more deeper into these issues and looking at specific modules with a thematic approach. That is to say, we have the week, we have the basic program, the level 1 program, which is looking at trade and gender policymaking in general. And now we're going to offer some specific modules focusing on, for example, trade, gender, and standards, trade, gender, and climate change, trade, gender, and gender-based violence. And these modules, we're going to develop them in collaboration with other international organizations. So with the standards, the trade, gender, and standard module is going to be the first one. And we're going to do this with the UNECE. They have this. They have been working on gender and standard for so many years now, and so we want to kind of, you exploit that expertise and bringing the trade aspect to that. So this is basically what we intend to do in terms of the training aspect, and in terms of the research aspect. Earlier, you've mentioned the WTO Gender Research Hub, so we're going to continue working jointly with the hub. And actually, in June 2025, we're going to have the second edition of the World Trade Congress on Gender, which is this international research conference on trade and gender. The first edition was held in December 2022. And I'm really hoping that we can organize the second edition together with UN Women. We are in discussion right now, but I think we are pretty much aligned. So I'm pretty sure things will work out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boghossian, for these interesting insights, and you've given us a lot of food for thought here. I was thinking that we would now perhaps open the floor for any questions or comments. And please raise your sign for those of you who are joining us here in the room, or those online. Write your comments in the chat box or raise your hand.
Yes. Good morning, and thank you so much for organizing this event. I'm Adriana Quiñones from UN Women, and it's perfect timing because we just finished CSW in New York on Friday, and it was about eliminating poverty for women. Around the world, there are, according to the Secretary General's report, 10.3% of women who live in extreme poverty today. And these agreed conclusions have more and more an emphasis on implementation. So I'm sure we can continue to integrate these issues. There's a call for reforming international institutions that provide funding, debt, taxing regulations, but also a call to continue to fund women's organizations that are on the ground, really taking the shock, absorbing the shocks of different conflicts, of humanitarian challenges and crises, and of course, mobilizing the economy. So we look forward to continuing this conversation, Anush, and congratulations for bringing to the center the issues of gender and trade.
Thank you. Do you want to quickly respond to that?
Yeah, just to say that actually, really implementation and impact is a key also focus now on the work that we do. And as I highlighted, we are going to do this research on understanding how impactful these gender provisions are on women, and we're going to continue down that path. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that since time flies here, I think we would now like would move on to the second section for today. And there we will focus on the results and lessons learned from the EIF's Empower Women, Power Trade initiative. So launched on the International Women's Day in 2019, the EIF's Empower Women, Power Trade initiative has been dedicated to transforming the economic lives of women in the LDCs through targeted trade-related projects, with a focus on fostering gender-responsive policies and supporting sectors where women are predominantly engaged. The initiative has contributed to a greater focus on gender in the EIF, where the representation of women among EIF beneficiaries has now increased beyond 60%. First, to get a deeper understanding of this initiative's background and progress, we are pleased to hear from the Executive Director of the Executive Secretariat for the EIF, Mr. Ratnakar Adhikari. Mr. Adhikari, could you share with us the story of Empower Women, Power Trade in the context of the EIF?
Thank you, Ambassador. And I would also like to welcome everybody to this, to the room, and those who are participating online. Being a co-organizer, I think I should welcome all of you. So thank you for being there for us. Ambassador, what I want to do is to divide this into 3 different sub-stories. And these sub-stories make up the overall story of Empower Women, Power Trade. The first is the story of commitment. When I say story of commitment, what we realized back in 2016 when we were preparing the strategic plan for the EIF Phase 2, the first strategic plan for the EIF Phase 2, we had set a target of 33% total women beneficiaries. And we realized that by 2018, we were able to meet the target. And we wanted to now challenge ourselves and then move to a higher level. So when we were preparing the strategic plan for the second part of the second phase of the EIF, it sounds confusing, but then the second part is actually started in 2019 and lasted till 2023, and some of the activities are still being undertaken. So in that, we increased the target to 55%, and that was our commitment. And then we wanted to sort of, achieve that commitment. And in order to do that, we introduced Empower Women, Power Trade initiative. As you rightly mentioned, it focused on policy as well as sectors where women are predominantly engaged. So it was a commitment to gender dimension. It was a commitment of resources. When I say commitment of resources, there was this leadership that was provided by the then Deputy Executive Director, and we also appointed the senior coordinator as the gender focal point, and we have an officer who had devoted almost 50% of her time in looking at the gender aspect of it. Then we also provided a financial commitment of 5 million of dedicated resources were called for proposal in order to support various initiatives as a part of Empower Women, Power Trade initiative. And also a commitment from various countries, particularly LDCs, to incorporate gender dimension in in their project planning itself, particularly the the project relating to productive capacity building. Then we also had a commitment to quality, because we had a very strict quality at entry requirement, which guaranteed that we were not only ticking the boxes and filling the number element in that, but also maintaining certain degree of quality in terms of the outcome. So that's the first part. The second part is the story of partnership. And we realized that we won't be able to do it alone. EIF would not have been able to do it alone at all. So therefore, we partner with the like-minded institutions who had the expertise as well as resources. For example, Global Shea Alliance, we'll hear a presentation from them today. They contributed to 35,000 women, being brought into the market because of their contribution, because through our support. And International Trade Center, a trusted partner of ours. Similarly, through the call for proposal, we were able to rope in partners such as UNESCAP. We'll be hearing their presentation as well. The International Telecommunication Union, East African Women in Business Platform, Fair Trade Africa, Australia and New Zealand, and finally UNCTAD, who happens to be our trusted partner, one of the core partners of the EIF. So what they brought, when I say resources as well as expertise, in terms of resources, GSA, Global Shea Alliance, contributed additional 1.4 million to the kitty, where we had provided money, and as a result of which they were able to achieve what they were able to achieve. Similarly, ITU, International Telecommunication Union, through their equal partnership, they were able to contribute additional resources as well. Then the third one is a story of rigorous monitoring, evaluation, learning, and course correction. And this happened because we were able to create the log frame and indicator at the before the launch of the program itself, and there was a close monitoring and review, and there were various checkpoints with the partner agencies who were responsible for implementing the project, as well as we relied on the semi-annual and annual reports submitted by these projects. So that's how we were able to find solution to the problems where there were problems, and we were able to make course correction in order to be able to fulfill all the objectives, targets, and indicator of the project. That's the program, as a result of which we are able to increase the number of beneficiaries in terms of percentage to 61% as of now. This is 2022 figure. So 2023 figures are yet to come, and we will be happy to share that as well. And now we are doing the final evaluation, which would be presented later this morning. So I want to stop here, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adhikari, for that overview. I think it forms a perfect backdrop for our discussions. So before we go into the findings from the review of this initiative, we will first explore a couple of EIF gender-focused project snapshots. These insights are drawn from diverse contexts and regions where the EIF is engaged, and will give us a tangible sense of the initiative's implementation on the ground. And to do that, we are fortunate to welcome three esteemed panelists from the EIF partnership. We have Ms. Jafo Mamatu, President of the Global Shea Alliance, joining us online and bringing a Francophone perspective. Also, Dr. Rajan Sudesh Ratna, Deputy Head and Senior Economic Affairs Officer at the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, UNESCAP, joining us also online. And Ms. Kriti Sharma, Associate Program Officer at the International Trade Center, ITC, joining us here on stage. I would like to turn to our first speaker, Ms. Jafo Mamatu. In partnership with the EIF, the Global Shea Alliance launched a regional project in 2019 across 4 LDCs in West Africa: Benin, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Togo. The initiative aimed at reducing poverty and fostering inclusive participation in the global trade of value-added shea products. At the heart of their mission was women's economic empowerment through strengthening women's cooperatives, promoting regional integration of the she supply chain, and facilitating international market participation. Ms. Jaffo, the she industry is often referred to as women's gold in the region, highlighting the significance both economically and culturally for women. Could you elaborate in around 3 minutes on why she is so important and how women's involvement in the she industry contributes to their economic empowerment?
Merci, Madame l'ambassadrice. La filière carité du Bénin dans le monde entier est une ressource dans laquelle on peut trouver 99% de femmes membres. La filière carité, c'est une ressource naturelle dont les femmes ont besoin, dont tout le monde a besoin. Quand il vient au moment où il y a soudure, c'est une période où il n'y a plus de nourriture dans les greniers des maris. Les maris ont déjà vendu leurs produits et c'est la famine. Maintenant, ce sont ces braves femmes qui vont ramasser les noix de karité, les transforment, les produisent, les amendent, les commercialisent et assurent leurs propres besoins. Ensuite, assurent les besoins de la famille. En faisant quoi? Elles approvisionnent les maisons en aliments, en produits alimentaires. Elles payent la scolarité des enfants. Elles prennent en charge les préparatifs liés au sol pour les campagnes prochaines. Et ensuite, elles font la prise des dépenses en charge liées au carême et même le ramadan. Voilà tant de choses que ces femmes font pendant cette période pour aider la famille, voire le pays, etc. Il y a beaucoup de choses qu'elles font. Ce n'est pas limité.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jaffo, for these valuable insights. I will now turn to our second speaker, Dr. Rajan Sudesh Ratna. The EIF collaborated with the UNESCAP on the project to support women entrepreneurs in South Asia. The aim was e-commerce for expanding their businesses and facilitating their integration into local, regional, and global supply chains. The initiative targeted women entrepreneurs from MSMEs, initially across Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal with the EIF funding support, and India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives with UNESCAP support. The aim was to empower them through digital and e-commerce skills development. Dr. Ratna, likewise in around 3 minutes, can you elaborate on some of the innovative approaches that led to the remarkable achievements from this project?
Thank you, Ambassador. Let me first of all thank the WTO and EIF for giving me this opportunity. This is just a glimpse of what we have done and which answers to your question. But there are many innovative methods which we brought in during the implementation as well as at the conceptual level. Because when we did the concept and started that project, we didn't anticipate COVID. And while implementing, we get the COVID. So what was innovative was we understood that if we are focusing on micro, small, and medium enterprises, and especially the women entrepreneurs, the digital divide, the knowledge, the lack of capacity, they suffer from many of these impediments. And in this regard, one of the challenges which we faced was how do we onboard them onto any of the e-commerce platforms. And so we created a dedicated resell online portal which replicates anything which is required on any of the e-commerce or marketplaces. And we did their hand-holding on, how to prepare the product brochure, how to do the content writing, upload catalog, etc. And that led to a very high rate of success in terms of the deliverables for us, because this led to a lot of, many of these women onboarding on various e-commerce platforms, and also using many of the digital platforms. And we also found that, given that we in between went into online, we need to do a regional one, and the different languages were impediment, and different countries have different understanding, these women and entrepreneurs. So we created also a Facebook group, we created a WhatsApp group, which was innovative in giving them continuous online while we are doing the training helpline to be provided. In fact, because of these innovative approaches, we were able to create a kind of 3,000 MSME women entrepreneurs who were trained, onboarded into various e-commerce platforms. We expanded the country target of 4 to 25 countries, going to ASEAN and to Africa. And we did some online survey looking into offline to online as to how they were able to, whether they were able to generate some of these market. And we never anticipated that even during training, they would be able to do some businesses, and they could generate a business online of $116,000 in a 18 months time frame. The another innovative way we found was including the process of a kind of a trade fair. So whenever we were doing offline or online classes, we will always have a dedicated time for them to do their product promotion. And that also generated a lot of buying and selling online and offline too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ratna. Now I'll turn to our final speaker, Ms. Kriti Sharma. In partnership with the International Trade Center, the EIF supported the launch of the She Trades initiative in Zambia. The initiative aimed to bolster the participation of women-owned businesses by enhancing their competitiveness, strengthening market linkages, and enabling their inclusion in agricultural, textiles, and garments value chains. It sought to address the systemic barriers that hinder women entrepreneurs from accessing regional and international markets. Ms. Sharma, in your 3 minutes, can you give us some insights into the achievements of this initiative, particularly when it comes to enhancing the economic empowerment of women entrepreneurs and fostering their integration into value chains? And also, how has the project contributed to expanding women's participation in regional and international markets?
Thank you, Ambassador. Is everyone able to hear me? Wonderful. Thank you. Now, before I begin, I'd really like to thank our partners, WTO and Enhanced Integrated Framework, for the invitation. We at ITC are very grateful for the partnership and the continued collaboration to really move the needle on the women and trade agenda. Now, as many of you know, ITC assists small and medium-sized enterprises, mainly in developing and transition economies, to become more competitive in global markets. And through this, we also contribute to sustainable economic development within the framework of the Aid for Trade agenda and the UN SDGs. And as ITC's flagship program on women's economic empowerment, She Trades really takes on a multi-pronged and an ecosystem approach. So we work with women entrepreneurs to ensure that they not only have the right skills and capacity to succeed in markets, but we also engage with key stakeholders in the trade ecosystem to create the right conditions for women-led businesses to prosper. And this unique position really helps us get an intimate understanding that's faced by women entrepreneurs, so that we can really create tangible and tailored solutions that can translate into positive and tangible impact for women. Now, in the framework of the She Trades initiative, She Trades Zambia was launched in 2019 with the goal of really strengthening the participation of Zambian women-led businesses in trade. And we wanted to achieve that through 3 pillars. So the first one, really to nurture an enabling ecosystem for women to trade. Secondly, to really provide them with the skills and competitiveness with a special focus on agriculture, textiles and garments, honey and moringa value chains. And thirdly, to really help them unlock their business and financial linkages. And our achievements have really been substantial, and I'd be delighted to share with you a few. Firstly, we successfully convened a very broad range of public and private stakeholders under the umbrella of the project. So we worked hand in hand with the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry, with the Zambia Development Agency, so really embedding all our work within local institutions and aligning them with the national priorities. We also joined forces with the Bank of Zambia, which is the central bank of the country and the regulatory institution. And this has been really instrumental in bridging the gender financing gap, but also activating a cohort of financial institutions who are committed to raise funding going into the hands of women. We also developed a practical catalog, which includes sustainable and funding options that women can peruse through and access based on the right financial instruments and services that would be better suited to their needs. Secondly, we worked with over 1,500 women entrepreneurs, particularly in the value chains that I mentioned. And through this, we really enabled them to successfully identify their unique value proposition, but also adopt the right tools and business practices that would really distinguish them from their competitors. We also provided focused trainings in skills like packaging, branding, marketing, digital tools and solutions, among many other topics. And building on this work, we then prioritized creating very unique pathways to market access that not only opened up local markets, but also tapped into the regional and international arenas. And we achieved that through 2 different pillars. So the first one involved working with local and regional buyers. So we really engaged with them to foster gender-inclusive procurement practices. We engaged with retailers in the region and in Zambia to firstly understand the sourcing requirements that they have, to really share the profiles of women and at the same time foster connections and matchmaking. And this was done through buyer-seller meetings, but also through exhibition areas that were set up as part of event activities. And secondly, we also facilitated the participation of women in trade fairs and B2B activities to really open doors in new markets that they regularly did not have access to. And as a result of this, the women have reported accessing over 18 international markets, from US to China to UAE and many other regions. A few other achievements that I'd like to highlight is that through the project activities over the last few years, we have successfully generated over $3 million in business and investment opportunities, and also facilitated the creation of 348 new jobs, out of which 75% have directly gone into the hands of women. So in summary, the project has really been a catalyst for change, and we really call it as a small project with a big heart, because it has not only fostered the right skills and competitiveness for women, but has also underscored and highlighted the power of partnerships and driving inclusive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharma, for your remarks. Now, I have a second set of questions to each of our panelists, but since we're running a little bit, time is flying, as I said. I'll ask our panelists to try to keep your answers this time to like 1 or 2 minutes, please. So I will turn to Ms. Jaffo again. Could you share with us how the EIF and the GSA partnership addressed the challenges faced by women shea processors when it comes to achieving quality production and accessing international markets?
Merci, Madame l'ambassadeur. Dans nos activités, nous, femmes collectrices et transformatrices de qualité, nous sommes confrontés à plusieurs difficultés, notamment le manque d'espace de stockage de nos amandes de qualité, l'insuffisance d'informations et de formation sur la recherche de qualité par les acheteurs, les difficultés d'accès au marché et bien d'autres. De 2020 à 2023, en partenariat avec le cadre intégré renforcé, l'Alliance globale du Carité et ses partenaires ont mis en œuvre le programme régional d'appui au développement du commerce inclusif dans la filière Carité dans 4 pays en Afrique de l'Ouest, à savoir le Bénin, le Burkina Faso, le Mali et le Togo. Les résultats concrets obtenus en 3 ans sont 50 entrepôts construits, 12 au Bénin, 13 au Burkina Faso, 13 au Togo et 12 au Mali. 50 coopératives mises en place. Plus de 35 000 femmes formées sur les bonnes pratiques de production, la recherche du marché, la gestion des contrats. 4 semi-industriels de Carité sont fonctionnels. Par exemple, grâce à ces formations, les femmes savent désormais comment négocier les termes d'un contrat de vente avec les acheteurs. Nous savons également que dans les négociations, il faut prioriser les intérêts des membres et nous avons pris conscience de l'importance de commercialiser nos produits à travers sa coopérative. De plus, le projet nous a permis de participer à différentes foires en Afrique et en Asie pour rechercher de nouveaux débouchés. Plus spécifiquement, nous avons participé à des foires en Afrique du Sud, à Singapour et en Corée. Merci.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jaffo. I will now turn to Dr. Ratna again. What are some of the success stories or transformations of this Women's Economic Empower project, and that can be replicated perhaps elsewhere, according to you?
Am I audible? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
The success stories which can be replicated and actually which is being replicated under the project which has been done. We have created a great network of many of these women associations in different countries in Southwest Asia where they are working. We have a SODEF, which is the South Asia Women Development Forum, which has brought women entrepreneurs together. And we also organize some training of trainers in India, in Sri Lanka, and now we are trying for other countries to replicate these trainings by the local partners to make it sustainable. Also, the network and the Facebook group and the WhatsApp group, despite the project being over, are still working and generating a lot of business among all these women entrepreneurs. Their networks as really still we keep getting their messages, help in certain cases which we provide. And we are also, there is a lot of demand coming from different governments after the project attended, like from Maldives and from Sri Lanka and India, where we are organizing these trainings to the extent possible, sometimes online, sometimes offline, depending on things. The other things which are also replicable is we developed certain knowledge products which are already there in the public domain, which are freely available, and we are disseminating it with all these trainers and women agencies who are utilizing them for their future training. So that is what I would like to say right now. Thank you. And these are some of the success stories of the women trainers.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Ratna. And now back to Ms. Sharma. In light of the successes achieved through the She Trades initiative in Zambia, what specific strategies or approaches do you believe are essential for ensuring the sustainability and scalability of these achievements? In particular, what lessons can other initiatives learn from the She Trades Zambia when it comes to working in partnerships with the wider business community?
Thank you, Ambassador. So I'll perhaps share 3 strategies and approaches. So the first one being multi-stakeholder partnerships, because they really are the engines for achieving scale and sustainability, and we adopted a similar approach within She Trades Zambia. So an example of that would be the collaboration of Bank of Zambia, which is the central bank, the regulatory organization through which we address both the supply and demand side of the gender financing gap. So we worked with capital providers to provide gender sensitization training, really share practices and embed the ecosystem for gender lens financing. At the same time, we provided financial literacy workshops to women to ensure that they are ready for investment. And then we work to bridge this gap and really bring those actors together. We've also supported Bank of Zambia to create a gender mainstreaming plan, which shows that they will continue to move the needle on this agenda beyond the lifetime of the project. Secondly, as we heard today in the presentations, recognizing that equitable policies are really the building blocks of gender inclusivity and economic growth. And we must work with governments to develop and enforce these. An example, as part of She Trades Zambia, we worked with the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry and the Zambia Public Procurement Authority to really boost public procurement opportunities for women, but also mainstream the collection of sex disaggregated data. And as a result of our work, the Public Procurement Bill was revised and passed in the Parliament in 2020, which highlighted women-owned enterprises as a target group, which would now avail the exemption of bid security amount. And the third one, to really recognize that while it's important to work with women, it's also important to empower local actors and foster strengthened institutions to do, to make sure that we are creating scale and sustainability of interventions. And throughout the project, we have worked with business support organizations, but at the same time also provided gender mainstreaming trainings to the private sector, who will continue to work on this agenda beyond the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sharma. With that, we conclude the exploration of project snapshots. Now let's move over to the review that has been conducted of the initiative. In collaboration with gender evaluation expert Charlotte Örnemark, the EIF has undertaken a comprehensive assessment of the implementation of the Empower Women, Power Trade initiative and its broader approach to women's economic empowerment since 2019. The aim of the review is to capture valuable lessons learned and provide recommendations for further enhancing implementation strategy. While the comprehensive evaluation report is being finalized and will soon be made available, Ms. Örnemark today will give us a brief overview of the key findings. Ms. Örnemark, I invite you to share some of your insights with us.
Thank you very much. So we can go straight into the next slide. So just briefly about this external review, I just wanted to highlight a few things, and of course, more details can be found in the actual report. The purpose was to have a review at a little bit more meta level, to focus very much on the portfolio as a whole, rather than going into specific projects. I mean, we reviewed also. I reviewed their specific projects but more to sort of see the patterns across. The evaluation questions were very much following the normal kind of evaluation questions of relevance, effectiveness, efficiency in terms of how the portfolio was managed, and also how sustainable results are expected to be. Of course, that's just a general comment, is that keep in mind that this was launched 2019, so it hasn't actually been going on for very long. But this was to give some initial lessons and to sort of really see what comes out of this from a more meta level. Many of these projects had also very recently undergone their own project evaluations. So we tried, of course, to make use of that and use those and review the project documents quite extensively, rather than duplicating what was already being looked at on the ground, but focused in very much on hearing feedback from the implementers. So that gave the contextualization, and also tried to see then to push a little bit towards those broader lessons at an outcome level. In doing so, it was much of a systems approach, trying to see how the system of EIF is set up to deliver on this agenda, and also try to then gather some lessons on what could be done going forward. Next slide, please. Just a few words on the analytical framework and some considerations in relation to that. I'm sure many of you are familiar already with the Gender at Work framework, which looks both at the individual and systemic paradigm, and also the informal formal. And of course, this has been applied mostly to institutions and gendering institutional practices. But it made sense here, since we were looking at how well EIF was placed as an organization and to deliver on this. So just the next slide, please. So if we just take that in terms of, and I show this only to give you a sense of the holistic framework we were looking for, because of course, if you have a gender lens, almost all of these domains need to see some sort of change, both in terms of, for instance, the individual informal, where can be a lot about internalized gender stereotypes, and you talked a lot about stereotypes earlier, and then where networking really comes into play. The more sort of on an individual level, but formal, where access to finance and productive resources come into play. We have, of course, the gender inclusive policies, which we heard about earlier, and then very importantly, the social norms and the unwritten rules of what women can and cannot do in the value chains. And we heard some about that along the way. Next one. So some key findings and lessons. I think one, and again, there's a lot of text on this slide. I will not go through all, but just give you some of the top line conclusions. One important part in terms of relevance is that it's such a unique strength of the EWPT is the focus on value chains and contexts where gender inequality largely intersects with poverty and other forms of marginalization. As we heard, there was a conscious choice to choose the value chains where women were present. And that makes sense. It aligns very well with the SDG 5.5 and the Doha Program of Action for LDCs, because these are really countries, of course, where gender inequalities are the most severe and most present. For such alignment or for such focus to be meaningful, however, it's important to have this catalytic shift of the conditions for women at scale as well. So not just the top level of the already maybe empowered entrepreneur, but to really look across the whole value chain. And again, the main purpose here is really to look where these intersectional dimensions exist and to try to address them. But doing so, one should also keep in mind that that makes these pathways to market and to international markets more complex. So it's by no means an easy task necessarily that EIF was undertaking when launching this initiative. However, it is the conclusion of the evaluation that EIF, together with partners, have the potential to make a positive contribution in this area, with some good examples highlighted also in the evaluation report. Next slide, please. Having said that, of course, at a very overall level, we look at the theory of change, which is fairly schematic, and there is still among some of the implementers and in this field in general, and I come from this as an external evaluator, there is this prevailing assumption somehow that supporting women-led or women-owned as MSMEs automatically has some sort of positive ripple effects throughout the value chains. Including for women who work at the periphery or maybe at the heart of the value chain, meaning the ones who are really doing the supply or the nut collection, as we heard about. And that cannot necessarily be taken for granted, because women at different levels of the value chain clearly face different forms of gendered barriers, depending on where in the value chain they operate. And it's also not to be taken entirely for granted that the ones operating at the top of the value chain, maybe they're already fairly empowered or nearly export ready or exporting woman entrepreneur, necessarily has the time and resources to then channel more support and capacity building further out in the value chain. In general, however, the EWPT projects were good at focusing on this and actually honing in on this, knowing how, in the context they were working in, and how many gender barriers exist, especially for rural women, for instance. So in general, there were some conscious focusing on this issue. However, that could be possibly done more strategically, consistently, and explicitly going forward, and also be reflected more prominently in the overall theory of change. Next one, please. Many partners, however, realized or mentioned that the operating within the WTO gives EIF an opportunity to connect these projects with higher level dialogue in the WTO context, focusing on the most systemic barriers and inequalities where gender inclusive trade is the most challenging. This was new to some of the partners chosen, and they saw that as an opportunity to really try to connect, as we talked about, the focus and increased focus on implementation to some of these higher level diagnostics and research and dialogue that is happening at a WTO level. And that EIF was in a unique position to make those connections and could do so maybe more going forward, in terms of really building in and not losing sight of the poverty aspects of support to women. Yes, I can take the next slide, please. All projects achieved substantial results given the available time frame. Again, these were fairly short-term projects with more of a catalytic effect. And in line with, of course, the overall results framework. EIF was seen as an important partner and funder in this space, not just women and trade in general, but in this quite narrow and focused space on really trying to remove some of the most tricky and sticky gender barriers in the contexts of some of these value chains targeted. There were efforts to balance institutional support and national level work could be challenging. I mean, getting really outside of the capital, or getting women involved from outside the capital, or getting those who were less empowered already involved, and making those actually not just be stuck at the periphery, but to get more involved in the national networking or networking among others could be a challenge. But as mentioned earlier, partners particularly realized or recognized the importance that EWPT, the importance to the subject of launching EWPT, in that it sort of put gender on the agenda, and it gave an excuse to bring it up with national counterparts in ministries of trade. And in that sense, EIF was really appreciated as a broker of relations between these external implementing partners and the national processes. And I think there, of course, again, there will be some recommendations that this could be done even maybe more focused going forward, of really embedding the gender priorities in the national trade diagnostics, and then to work and link dialogue and support to those going forward, so that this ownership is really embedded, because that seems to be where EIF and EWPT has the biggest advantage. Next one, please. The way the results framework is currently framed has been a lot about targets and getting sort of women on the map, and it does not necessarily capture the unique value proposition of the EWPT or the optimal role division between EIF, national implementing units, and implementing partners. And that's an area where one could really learn going forward, because there is a very distinct and clear value proposition in EIF's EWPT program, but that is not necessarily coming out when you look at the documentation. It does, however, come out when you talk to partners, and that's important to highlight here, because they saw that this interacting through EWPT and through EIF gave them a certain niched advantage from just operating on their own, and that could be captured more going forward, and also pushing it a little bit more to the outcome level to see how those attitudes and trade and practices really inside the ministries of trades and inside those value chains are changing going forward. Another need is to not just focus on number of women participating. Of course, women are already participating at several levels in some of these value chains targeted, but also to see how some of the mobility of women in those value chains are. Are they stuck at a lower level of that collecting, for instance, as we heard here, or do they cooperate, form cooperatives, and are those being used then to upscale and upgrade a little bit also the women's skills and ability to have influence over decision-making in those value chains. Nevertheless, we saw effects, I mean, of these projects at both the individual sphere in the household, as mentioned earlier. Women are able to better cope, feel more resilient. They form, actually a spin-off effect was they often formed these groups to set up some saving schemes and to be better resourced to invest again in their micro businesses. So they were both from the individual level, household level, and also to some collective gains in these newly cooperatives that they were then used by other donors coming in, right? So that setting a little bit, strengthening the institutional mechanisms to support women at different levels of the value chain. So there were results in all those areas. One should, however, when looking through a lot of the documentation, which I've done, be aware that the use of women's empowerment is being a little bit used. It's not very clear how this term is being used. And going forward, it would be useful, I think, to have more of a clearly spelled out framework for what does that mean? Does it, just next slide, please.
Sorry to interrupt, but can we try to wrap
Yes.
up in a bit, because I see the time is
Time is
running
flying,
out.
yes.
Yes, thank you.
Just very briefly on this, in terms of efficiency, I think the EIF was appreciated to be very agile donor compared to us, and a very involved one. So especially during COVID, there was an appreciation for taking some of the capacity building initiatives online and trying to really use this effectively. And I think that links into what we've heard earlier. And also there was an advantage for the EIF being small and a quite agile team. And also that they said they know trade, so they could always support partners who might not be as familiar in this area. Next slide, please. And we're coming to an end. I think one of the purposes of launching WPT was to sort of kickstart some of these processes so that other donors could come in and supplement funding, which happened, and quite often, I should say. So that worked well. For some, it could be also seen as be a little bit distracting, and it would be better, some said, to, yes, if that is the case, then have a more clearly spelled out theory of change to start, and also be more clear which areas you need donors to come in and supplement funding for initially, not at the end or not as part of the implementation process, because then it can get a little bit lost along the way. So next one, please. So very brief then for future programming. I think the main added value was that EIF and the EWPT was seen as a mechanism for dedicated institutional strengthening, setting up the systems necessary to shift some of those gender barriers at different levels. And I'm trying to wrap up. So, and also, but to going forward, to make sure that the solid diagnostic is there, so that actually there is more of a nuanced understanding of what barriers exist and which ones are being targeted by the projects, so that not try to do everything, not try to empower everyone in the value chain, but to be very specific on what is being done, where others can come in, and to really enhance that poverty reduction angle. That is something that EIF is well placed to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Örnemark, and sorry for rushing you a little bit there. So we've had a lot of food for thought here, very useful, and I know that we are actually running out of time, but also we started a couple of minutes later. So if okay, I suggest that we could just add a couple of extra minutes, because I would really like to open up the floor to allow for some questions if there are any. So please feel free. Oh, please.
Morning, Mariangela Linoci from UNCTAD. This Empower Women, Power Trade initiative financed 2 projects of UNCTAD, and it really contributed to expand the capacity building initiative on trade and gender through the development of new online courses dedicated to the LDCs and to e-commerce. So on behalf of UNCTAD, I wanted to show our appreciation for the support, and also because we have reached over 460 participants through this online capacity building, strengthening the awareness about the trade gender linkages, and also supporting the development of gender responsive trade policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I see we have a question over there.
Good morning, Nicole Menta from the WTO. I just wanted to share to comment on Anusha's comments earlier on today. I was online at that time. Also at MC13, you know, for the first time, the WTO hosted a 2-day event actually on women and trade. So that's where the compendium was launched. It was really, really an exciting time with the ITC. And Shriti is here. She did quite a bit of work, but together with the ITC, we also launched a $50 million fund for women in trade, but particularly women exporters in the digital economy. So women exporters in developing countries who are trading digitally. The UAE kicked us off with a donation of $5 million. So we're looking forward to getting more money from donors, first of all, in case there are potential donors in this room, but also to working with women in developing countries, helping them to access global value chains, and doing it at a more large scale, with a more large scale effect. So I wanted to mention that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharing good news, and there's more to do, right? Anyone else? Well, but that perhaps brings us to wrapping up. And I would like to warmly thank our speakers for joining us today and sharing their findings, both online and here in person. I would also like to thank all the participants here and online. I think we had around 60 people participating online. So thank you all for taking the time. I personally think that this has been very useful and a very interesting morning, providing both concrete lessons learned and forward-looking findings. And I cannot think of a better way to end this month, particularly dedicated to women empowerment. But the work for gender equality is one that continues also the other months of the year. And in taking that work forward, some takeaways from today's event could be the importance of gender responsive policies in fostering inclusive economic growth, the need for targeted support to sectors where women are predominantly engaged, the significance of collaboration between international organizations, governments, and civil society in advancing gender equality in trade, the positive news from the review around the contribution of the results delivered through the EIF on gender and trade, and the value of continuous evaluation and learning to improve the effectiveness of initiatives aimed at women's economic empowerment. So with those brief remarks and summing up, I would like to bring our meeting to a close. Once again, extending my sincere gratitude to our speakers and audience for your contributions to this discussion, and on a topic that is of great importance for us all throughout the year. Thank you.